Hi everyone, I'm Nicole van der Hoeven, and today I'm going to be testing in public. I'm going to be taking the theoretical project of one real company and talk through how I would plan my load tests for them. About a month or so ago, it might have been longer than that, I did a video on what load testing is, and my idea was to take you through the steps of planning a load test, scripting one, and executing one, and all that goes with it. The problem is that that's still at a very abstract level, and I know that when I was getting started, it helped to just be able to talk about things in real terms. So that's what I'm going to do for this video. Some disclaimers before I start. I am totally assuming things. This is a real company that I'm going to be tackling, but they have no idea that I'm doing this. I am basically guessing at what their needs might be just to create some sort of hypothetical case that we can work with. I also don't work for them and have no inside information. Having said that, I am a big fan. So, Wyrmwood Gaming is an American woodworking company that makes a lot of things, but they specialize in accessories and furniture for gaming, and in particular, tabletop role-playing games like D&D, so that's Dungeons and Dragons for the uninitiated, and Pathfinder and that kind of game. I happen to be a pretty avid D&D player myself. I play twice a week with two different groups. I DM one of them and I play in the other. But you don't need to know really any of that in order to get started. I basically chose Wyrmwood Gaming because I love their products and because they've been really transparent about what issues they're facing. So, with any project, I like to start with why. And the reason, because we need to run a load test, isn't enough. Why do you need to run a load test? What are the circumstances that led this company to believe that a load test might solve their issues? And in Wyrmwood's case, the theoretical reason that I've come up with is that they have traditionally gone to Kickstarter to launch new products, and that's been incredibly successful for them. They've made the top lists of most funded Kickstarters, depending on different ways that you slice it, for many of their Kickstarter projects. The problem is that they're growing to the point where when they release something, Kickstarter actually slows down.
Now, we've had a problem for the past couple of campaigns. I've been working with Kickstarter directly, and I've been going,
hey, our customers are getting the worst experience ever.
you're just refreshing the page every single day to see when you go live so you can get up in that bitch. And so many people are get kicked out, and it kicks them into a tier that's 6 months later than they originally did. It's bullshit, honestly.
I've noticed this myself as a backer in their last Kickstarter, where they did a collaboration with a company called Dispel to make just the most beautiful dice you've ever seen, but I digress. That project was very successful, and I was one of the backers who was there on the page when it went live on Kickstarter, refreshing the page because I just kept getting errors. And unfortunately, that's not something that they really have much control over because they're using another platform to do their releases. So, my hypothetical reason for load testing would be just pretend that they want to create their own platform for pre ordering on their site. So, it's all infrastructure that they control. Now, that is a big ask, and let's break it down. This would benefit them in a few ways. Firstly, if they had people going to their site and they did manage to get a really solid platform going that didn't fall over during the first few minutes of a new release, then that would mean they'd avoid pissing off customers who may or may not have ended up backing later. So the obvious benefit is that there is no hemorrhaging of customers in the first few minutes of a release. The second is that Kickstarter is a service, they're also a company, and they charge as they should. They take 20% in fees, 20% of the total profit of the Kickstarter, which is significant when you're talking about millions of dollars. So taking Kickstarter out of the equation, assuming that they do manage to get it going, would save them 20% in fees. So let's talk about scope. What's going to be included in our hypothetical load test? So the first obvious thing to include in our scope for our hypothetical load test is their website. Wyrmwood Gaming do have a website where they take orders for not just pre-orders, but just orders for things that they commonly have in stock. So things like their dice tower and dice tray and dice. I imagine that they would have a separate section on their site to cater for pre-ordering. And what I want is to find out what payment provider they use. So now we know that they're not using some in-house payment system. They're using Stripe, which means that in a load test, we're not going to want to actually load test Stripe, because at least not without their permission, because that has ramifications on their customers and maybe in breach of any contract. So that's something that we would want to figure out. How much testing can we do? Or perhaps Stripe just has an SLA, a service level agreement, and they say that they can handle a certain number of requests per second for payment processing and so on. Sometimes looking through documentation or reaching out to the legal department or reading contracts is part of how you verify the performance of an application. Another thing to think about is email. So this is a receipt and it looks like it's being sent by Stripe. So again, something to bring up with a Stripe representative or look at in the contract. Can they handle the number of backers that Wyrmwood would expect to get? So if they have databases that are storing those customer emails, we want to look at the capacity. What about, I don't know if they have any internal applications. Are those hosted in the same spot as their as their website servers? Because we want to know whether that would also whether there would also be a slowdown in accessing that data. Two more things to consider in scope. One is, I don't know if they currently use a CDN. If they aren't, they probably should be. That's something that we can find out when we're load testing their site from different geographical regions. That's one of the coolest things about being able to test on the cloud. If you just run a load test from one location, then you're kind of assuming that all of your users are from that place, which is not likely, right? So testing from different areas in the world will tell you whether your CDN is slower when serving up pages in Sydney compared to when serving up pages in San Francisco. And the second thing is, in their last Kickstarter, they did like a partnership with Dispel Dice, who have their own website. They're a separate company. And so if they do another sort of collaboration like that, it might actually be worthwhile to do a load test on that partner's site and servers as well, because they're likely going to experience the same surge in demand that Wyrmwood does, even if Wyrmwood is the one that's going to be handling the pre-ordering part. Okay, on to workload modeling. Now, a workload model is like a diagram or an idea of how many users there are going to be, doing what, for how long, and we're going to, obviously, there's no way that we can know, right? And Wyrmwood also won't know in advance how many backers they're going to have. But there are some things that we can do to kind of narrow the field a little bit and get some sort of an estimate. Kickstarters are still public even after they've funded, but a cool site that I like to use to look at some metrics for Kickstarters is KickTrack. This is the KickTrack page for the most successful Wyrmwood Kickstarter, which was their modular gaming table. You can see that they got $8.8 million in this Kickstarter. So you can sort of see the numbers that we're playing with, right? The thing is, though, that this Kickstarter was for a modular gaming table, meaning those tables were more expensive than their normal products. So even though it's $8.8 million and might be the most successful Kickstarter for Wyrmwood in terms of monetary value, from a load perspective, this might not actually be the best project to go based off, unless they're doing another release with similarly priced objects. And the reason is that even though the 8.8 million is a large amount of money, the number of backers informs the load way more than the monetary value, right? Because to computers, it doesn't really matter whether there's an extra zero, like that's going to have very little to no performance impact. So what we actually want to look at is one of the Kickstarters where they had a lot of backers. And I think a really good one to look at for that is the previous one, the previous Kickstarter, Dice by Wyrmwood and Dispel. This is the collaboration that I was talking about earlier. And the reason why I think it might be a better one to go off of for our estimates is that they were selling dice, so dice in general are cheaper than like wooden dice trays or furniture. So they had 18,580 backers, and one of them is me. If we compare that to the modular gaming table, yeah, see, they only had 7,713, even though the total amount is 2 million for the dice. I would suggest for this because Wyrmwood is on a pretty steep growth trajectory. I would imagine that in our testing, the later part of the testing will be, twice up to several more times of this amount. But I would say about 19,000 might be a good beginning goal to start with, just to make sure that it's at least going to meet the demand for what we've already seen historically. A caveat for this is that those 19,000 backers had 31 days to pre order. So we don't really know the distribution. Like, was it 1,000 an hour, a day, and then is it constant all throughout, or is it higher in the beginning or higher at the end? Luckily, KickTrack can show us that. So we can go to daily data, and it looks almost like a reverse bell curve. So it's higher at the ends, although way higher in the beginning. So this initial chunk of, what is this? 875,000. Oh, this is by dollars though. So let's look at backers per day. All right. So let's say we got 9,436 on the first day. So this tells us that most of the backers knew right away that they were going to be pledging and pledged within the first day of the Kickstarter. So we don't know. Now, KickTrack doesn't show us the breakdown by hour, but it's kind of hard to stumble upon this Kickstarter project by chance if you weren't already a fan of Wyrmwood. So I'm going to conservatively suggest that most of it was within the first hour or so of the release. So I'm going to say, conservatively, maybe we should say that half of that was within the first hour. So 4,718, and we'll do 78 per minute. I think that if I were testing this, just to be sure, I would be ramping up from, let's say, 2,000 users in the first 10 minutes, all the way up to this full number, 4,718, and see how the application goes. I hope this was useful. Again, I want to stress that this is an oversimplification because I don't have a lot of the information. So this is just a hypothetical scenario, but I hope it helped you listen to me talk through the different options that I'm considering for this hypothetical project. In future videos, I do plan to actually create the script and talk about execution options. So should it be on the cloud? Should it be on-prem? How exactly are we going to coordinate that load? But that's to come. Till then, thanks for watching.